talk. So I'm very pleased to welcome Bernard Eccles. Bernard's been writing, teaching and lecturing about astrology for 40 years or more. He's been president of the Astrological Lodge of London. He was a winner of the Charles Harvey Award in 2011 and a frequent lecturer at astrological conferences. Bernard has spoken to our group in Cheltenham many times over the years and in recent times online. And if you're a regular attendee, you'll be familiar with Bernard's cogent contributions to our after talk discussion. So tonight he's talking about the upcoming ingress of Pluto in Aquarius. So welcome again, Bernard, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Pluto in Aquarius, as will be in a very few weeks from now. What is it about? It sounds very modern. It sounds very deep. I don't know whether it's the Pluto that sounds deep or the Aquarius that sounds deep, or the Aquarius that sounds modern, or Pluto being a modern planet. But the more I think about them, the more I get to this little catchphrase, deep logic. But what can we really expect? And more importantly, how do we know that? We don't know what Pluto's like in Aquarius. There's nobody alive who's seen it there last time round. And last time we didn't even know that Pluto was there. So we need to identify Pluto and we need to see what it means and go right back to first principles. So if you're new to the game of astrology, then perhaps the next few minutes will be useful, I think. Something that struck me when I was devising this talk was that for my generation, and there was a lot of us around in the 60s and 70s who all learnt our astrology at the same time. It was a boom time for astrology. We all had Pluto in Leo, so we all knew what Pluto meant. We didn't. We knew what Pluto in Leo meant. And then if you talk to people who have it in Virgo or Libra or Scorpio and so on, their experience of Pluto is absolutely different. And yet when you look in the books, quite a lot of which were written in the 70s and 80s, they're very dogmatic about what it is to have Pluto in your birth chart doing this and that. And so I found myself looking at what people's experience of Pluto was about. And it came to me that what Pluto does in a particular sign, in a funny kind of way, is to deny it to you. The Pluto in Leo people are often supposed to be the great egotistical generation, all about me, as it sometimes says about baby boomers. But I wondered whether the Pluto in Leo people had lost themselves and were trying to find who they were supposed to be, trying to find that solar leonine thing inside them, and Pluto hid it. That seemed to make sense when I spoke to people who have Pluto in Virgo. They seem more than averagely obsessed with their health. These are the people who adopted holistic, organic lifestyles, and so on. The Libra people seem very bothered about their relationships, and so on. And I thought to myself, this is almost as though Pluto hides from you something which ought to be there naturally, and you can't find it. And then I thought, well, that's pretty close to the myth. That's quite good. I also thought that Pluto, in a way, shows you what it's going to do as it enters the sign that it's about to enter. In 2008, as you can see, when it entered Capricorn, there it is, we were given a stock market crash. Lehman Brothers went bust and everybody's American mortgage collapsed and so on. And we've had something fairly similar in 2022 with a short-lived bankrupting of the nation, thanks to a very short-lived prime minister, or short-serving prime minister. And it seems that what Capricorn is kind of bookended with is financial problems. It's as though people can't reach their money, can't get to their money. It's like their money is taken from them. So this idea of things being taken from you, this idea of things being hidden, I thought, well, this is getting quite close to the myth of Pluto. If you look at past commentators on Pluto, you find that they are essentially, I give Sakoin and Acker a lot of flack, It was a book that everybody relied on so much in the 1970s, but they're speaking from their own era. This is the voice of people who have Pluto in Cancer or Pluto in Leo. So they expected Pluto in Sagittarius to be a transformation of religion as it is known at present. There will be one world religion based on man's direct, intuitive communion with the one creator. Well, I must have missed that, because up until now, I don't think that that's ever happened. Pluto in Aquarius, they confidently say, will be a time of tremendous scientific discovery and worldwide brotherhood. The Aquarian age will come into its full flower then. I haven't noticed that happening, particularly in Eastern Europe. I'm not seeing any worldwide brotherhood going on there. Alan Oken, who died recently, not too long ago anyway, writing about Pluto in Libra back in the 1970s, said that it would be a restructuring of the idea of justice as it is practiced in today's courts of law. But you can see how he gets that, because Saturn is exalted in Libra and the scales of justice are the scales of the sign and all of that. But he's also seeing it from the point of view of being a gay man, not openly so in the early part of his career. And of course, LGBT people are still fighting for their rights around the world. So he might have been right that Pluto in Libra started that process going. And he was right when he said the role of China will be seen to increase in world politics after decades of silent development. We'll see some more of China in a few minutes' time. So, you know, not bad. Let me remind you of the myth. There is only the one, and it's quite important. And we get our astrological symbolism entirely from myths. Now, how we get given Pluto, well, that's an act of fate, I think. We could have asked for a different god, but we didn't get it. You know, the person who named the planet, Pluto, picked a Greek god, or Roman god, same thing, but didn't think about the astrological consequences of it, because it was a child who named the planet. And so in all innocence, we were gifted this extraordinary new planet to play with and to add to our vocabulary. And that means that everything we do with it must be based on the myth. Now, I've chosen an illustration by Edmund Dulac from his book, Gods and Goddesses in Love, 1935, and he is the illustrator. Dulac is a very interesting chap, English between the wars and illustrating beautifully. And I love this picture because it's not like the usual Greek gods type thing where the protagonists are naked and writhing and all that kind of thing. It reminds me of a Persian miniature, actually. It's partly to do with his costume. But there is Persephone, and she's in a 1930s dress, and she's very pretty, and she's picking flowers. And Pluto comes up out of a hole in the ground, and you can see that. That's exactly what he's drawn. He comes up out of nowhere, and he kidnaps her. And he takes her beneath into the underworld. And this is the only myth of Pluto or Hades, whichever you want to call him. I mean, there are dozens of myths involving Zeus or Minerva or Hermes or all the other gods, but there's only one with Pluto Hades. This is it. He kidnaps Persephone, and he won't let her back until eventually Zeus and Demeter, her mother. Now, the word Demeter actually means mother, as Zeus in his original form of Diaspiter actually means sky father. So, as it were, the parents of the cosmos go to the underworld and say, Hades, you can't do this. Let us have her back. And he says, no. And Zeus says, I'm in charge of this. And Hades says, all right, half. You can have her back for 6 months, but then she comes back with me. This is a rough deal. At no point is he going to give in and give Persephone back wholesale. Once Hades has got something, you don't get it back. Same as once people are dead, they stay dead. They go underground, and that's where they are. So I think all of these 70s astrologers talking about transformation have missed it. Really, it's about an irreversible change, which is not normally to your benefit, and something gets taken from you. And then you have to spend 6 months of the year searching for it, as Demeter did for Persephone. Very few people get to go to the underworld and come back. Hercules did it, but he was a demigod. Orpheus does it, but he does it through the power of music. And because he looks back to check that she's following him back up to the light, and in doing so loses her forever, Orpheus and Eurydice. People in other myths do it, and they are changed forever as a result, including Jesus, of course. So therefore, throughout the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, you have a singular hero, just the one, who goes down to the underworld and comes back. But for the rest of us, once you're there, you stay there. You stay underground and you don't come back. There is no other myth of Hades or Pluto. So we need to think about this in our astrology. Let's create some vocabulary from that story. Here are some words that are often associated with Pluto. Deep. Yeah, I get that. Deep underground, the world beneath our own, not parallel to our own. Notice it's always underneath. Hidden. Yeah. Transformative. Sure is. It changed summer to winter, and we've had to have half and half ever since. Concealing and revealing. Yeah. Okay, that which was beneath comes up again. That which was above gets taken down into the darkness. Irreversible, inescapable, powerful, controlling. Hades controlled Persephone. Under, as in underneath, underground, all encompassing, because everybody gets to go underground at the end of their life. And then wealth. Now, why wealth? I'm not entirely sure. It may be because people were buried with grave goods. It may be because of hidden treasure. But whatever it is, or it may even be because of gold mines. You know, precious metals are found deep in the earth. They are Hades's realm. And we dig deep and we steal them from him. And then we put a lot of effort into cracking those stones to get the metals out. Whether we do it with heat or with chemicals or with whatever else. It's hard work getting metals out of the earth. They don't come out of the sky, and you don't find iron bars lying on the ground. It has to be extracted under force. So there's a lot of Plutonic mythology in that. And I want you to think about people who, in cultures that bury their dead rather than cremate them, and also people for whom mining in metallurgy is a hard and sometimes hidden part of what they do, whereas for the rest of the time they would be growing crops and looking after their herds. Here are some more Pluto ideas, and none of these come from the myth. So where do they come from? Well, people say that it's to do with people en masse, you know, thousands of people, millions of people, everybody. Political movements which involve a whole people at a time. Totalitarianism, Nazism, a lot of people associate Pluto with Nazism, nuclear power, nuclear war, and elimination. All of these you will find in the books as being associated with Pluto. And you have to say why. Where is the myth of Hades and Persephone in this? And the answer is it isn't. But this was the sort of stuff that was going on in the 1930s. When the world went to war, and when political movements which seemed to move a whole people forward with one mind, rightly or wrongly, where you had extreme political parties enforcing their will and changing societies, Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, fascism in Italy, and so on. And so what you do is you make a vocabulary for your planet out of the events that take place around the time when it was first discovered. And this is the case with Uranus and with Neptune and with Pluto. And that's fine, but it's a different way of creating an astrological vocabulary, so you need to be aware of what you're doing. The earlier astrological vocabulary, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, etc., they're not linked to a specific historical era or a date or anything like that. They are in some cases linked to specific myths and the way the planets behave in the sky and their astronomical cycles, but they're not linked to a specific historical era, the way that the meanings of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have been taken. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use these. It means that you should be aware of what you're doing. If you're going to put these meanings into your interpretation of Pluto, then ask yourself what you're doing and whether it's valid to use them 90 years after the event. You know, the 2020s from the 1930s, we're 90 years downstream. Rebirth and regeneration and sex and waste disposal are at the bottom because they get added in the 1960s. The 1960s people really couldn't cope with the idea of dying. So therefore they say, oh, it's just part of a cycle of life and death. And so therefore, just as Pluto takes you underground, he must also be bringing you back. I don't see that in the myth. Yes, I know Persephone comes back, but she's allowed to leave. Regeneration, maybe. And sex and waste disposal come from the fact that Pluto is given to Scorpio. No actual reason for that, it just is given to Scorpio, which makes it a sort of higher octave of Mars, which means that it can share the association with body parts that the original 7 planets had. And since Mars, as ruler of Scorpio, was to do with the genitals and the organs around that area of the body, then sex and waste disposal find themselves being given to Pluto because these are activities which are powerful yet hidden. That's okay, but you need to know where you're getting the symbols from as you use them. A long time ago, I was writing a book that needed some whizzy illustrations. So I created this. You can say, yes, I can see why. It's hand-drawn. It was before computers could do things like this. And I was linking all the meanings together. So I got Pluto as being to do with money, therefore banks, and to do with the unconscious, hippie astrology again, and obsession, influence, intensifying things. You can see how I hadn't looked at the myth. Transformation, regeneration, permanent change, birth, sex, death. I don't think Pluto has anything to do with birth. It's just that sex leads to birth sometimes. Orgasm got stuck out there somewhere. Then I go to underground, mines, wells, oil, coal, buried treasure. And then the idea of invisibility. That is to do with Hades, I'll grant you that. Hidden, criminal, detectives, clandestine espionage, secret societies. And I have to say, I laugh now at the idea of clandestinity and mass movement leading to something which I called the resistance. I think I was being romantic. I think we can move on from that diagram. Pluto is going to be in Aquarius. It would do us no harm if we repeated the exercise with the symbolism of Aquarius. Now, this is very interesting because I've been looking back at what people say about Aquarius. And until about the 1870s, no astrological author suggested that signs themselves had qualities connected to them. I'll just let that sink in a minute. There's plenty of books about having Mercury in Aquarius makes you like this, having Mars in Aquarius makes you like that, or whatever. But the sign itself, with the values that we all know so well, gets invented by the Theosophists. It's really an Alan Leo invention. And what he's really writing about is the qualities of somebody who has the sun in Aquarius, which is not the same thing as Aquarius itself. Nonetheless, a variety of things come out of it. Level, as in unemotional and fair-minded and balanced and all of that. Humane, that one goes back a long way. The idea that Aquarius is not just a human sign, but a humane sign goes a long way back. Intelligent, usually, kindly, fair, public-spirited, and cool. Not cool as in, wow, that's great, that's cool, but cool as in not hot, so therefore detached, emotionally cool. Yet all of these are what you get from a mixture of Saturn and the moon. Saturn and the sun will give you Capricorn's values. Saturn and the moon will give you Aquarius's values. And that's why they are more individual, more human, less to do with, I don't know, big structures, corporate stuff, empire building, all of that. You don't get that with Aquarius. And it's because the moon brings it down a level, cools it down. The moon's light is cooler than the sun's light. The moon cares about its community, hence public spirited and kindliness and so on. So it's Saturn at its best, rather than Saturn crushing and fighting against Jupiter. That's what Aquarius is. And Alan Leo describes somebody who has the sun in Aquarius like this. And actually, that goes into what we think of as Aquarius as a sign. But before the 1870s, the idea that a sign could have qualities like this, other than that a sign could be part of, earth, air, fire and water, or that it could be fixed or cardinal or mutable and those kinds of things. Other than that, you just don't get it. And at the bottom, we have individual, revolutionary and scientific and technical, and modern and utopian. And those values come about from the time when Uranus was discovered. And since Uranus was given to Aquarius, then Aquarius is given Uranus's qualities. And Uranus is revolutionary and utopian and modern because it comes about at the time of the invention of rational science. We discover Uranus at the time in the middle of the Enlightenment, politically and philosophically, when modern science is beginning to start off. And so you see then what's in the air, as it were. People are no longer believing in things like omens, or that such a thing might be the will of God, but rather that there are scientific reasons for it. And that is Aquarius, because it's Uranian and because Uranus is discovered in the middle of the 18th century. Uranus was also seen as mold breaking, revolutionary in the sense that it wasn't like anything that had gone before. And it was, as a person, Uranus was supposed to be like Napoleon, who was seen as, the giant of the age. So, think about that. Does Uranus mean that you set out to conquer Europe and turn back from Russia, that you wear your hat sideways and one arm always inside your jacket? I don't know. They chose not to use those bits. But these ones that I put at the bottom that are nothing to do with the moon and Saturn, they are to do with the era in which Uranus was found. So therefore, that comes to create the vocabulary of Aquarius. So we have a derived vocabulary from a myth for Pluto, and a derived vocabulary from Saturn and the moon for Aquarius, plus some time markers, if you like, for the 1930s and the middle of the 18th century. It's an odd mix. Perhaps we ought to have a look to see more about Pluto at its actual orbit. And here it is. It's a bit like a roller coaster. It runs through the signs fairly easily until it gets to about Cancer, and then it runs through them really quickly, and then it starts to slow down again. So most of us alive now, and I hope still watching and still listening, we remember Pluto at its fastest as it moved through Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius. Yeah. So this is the fast bit, and it's going to start slowing down again. And as it goes through Taurus, or Aries and Taurus and Gemini, yes, I realize this is the 1700s. If we want to go to the 20s, we're over here. It slows down. So people who were born in the 1950s will see their Pluto opposition if they live to be 80. It will have done half of the zodiac in 80 years. People who are born now won't ever see their Pluto opposition. They might see their square or their trine, because its speed through the signs varies so much. This is you have to take really long views with this. This is 500 years, and we've still only got 2 cycles on the graph. Something I want to look at, though, is its declination. Declination, as you know, is how far above and below the celestial horizon, celestial equator it is. And it comes to a peak in the 1680s, dives down and reaches its peak at the bottom in the 17s, up again, 1940, down again, we're approaching the base, 2030, and then up again. Okay. And the thing about this is that the peak of these and the trough is at about 24, nearly 25, plus or minus. And as you know, I am sure, once something gets to be over 22.5, it is considered to be out of bounds, because it is no longer within the bounds that are set by the sun's declinational movement, as it goes up to a maximum of 23, down to a minimum of 23. If a planet is outside those boundaries, it is out of bounds. And in a way, it can behave like a naughty child. It can do what it likes because the sun can't catch it and tell it what to do. It can write its own rules, if you like. Most planets are out of bound at some stage during their orbit. When Mars does it, you get a lot of fires and you get outbreaks of violence and so on and so forth. But Pluto is so slow that when it does it, you will get whole decades where Pluto seems able to do what it likes. Let me show you what I mean. Let me read this through to you. Pluto's declination exceeds the sun's maximum declination at the top and bottom of its cycle, which is out of bounds. Planets which are out of bounds are held to be uncontrolled or unrestrained, making their presence felt to an excessive degree, creating difficulties. And because it moves so slowly, Pluto is out of bounds for 10 to 20 years at a time. It was out of bounds from the spring of 38 right through to 55. It was therefore out of bounds throughout World War II, with its peak value achieved in April 45 and again in 1946. Its next out of bounds period starts in autumn 2025 and lasts through until 2035. The north one is always when Pluto's in Leo. The south one is always when Pluto's in Aquarius. So what happened last time? Well, its last south declinational maximum is to the 1790s. Two big things that happened with the French Revolution and the American War of Independence. What these do is break down monarchies. The French Revolution says we don't want a king, we don't want the church to control us, we want the people, we want freedom and fraternity and equality, you know, liberty, fraternity, equality, and all of that. And what the Americans want was to be free of the tax regime imposed upon them by the British government an ocean away, which had no idea of how the American states were governing themselves or their difficulties or their other trials and tribulations. So what they have their own Declaration of Independence, and they have to fight the British Army and get George III to let go of them, which duly happens. But what we have here when they're in the south declinational maximum is the breaking of the state, the breaking of the monarchy. And we are approaching one now. So I don't know which monarchy or which state is going to be broken. It needn't necessarily be a king. It could be some large system of government. It could be a country which has, a form of government which has held for many decades, indeed many centuries. That could be broken. But this is Pluto undermining because it's at the bottom of its curve. Go further back. The previous north declinational maximum, apart from the Second World War, was between 1680 and 1710. And that produced the 9 Years' War in Europe, picture of the Siege of Namur, that's in Belgium, 1692. The English-French Wars in Canada, and the war, we won that one, except for around Quebec, which still speaks French, yes. And the War of Spanish Succession in Europe. It also produced mass migrations because internal upheavals in France meant that people who were Protestants were persecuted. So an awful lot of them came to England, which was actually a very good thing because the Huguenots brought with them a lot of craft knowledge, particularly a lot of them were in the paper making and bookmaking industries, and they brought that expertise over to England with them and other similar trades and industries, and they became part of English society, and they were a great benefit to this country. So, you know, there's a lesson there. But displaced peoples, and of course, much war. So, you know, just telling you, in case you thought the next few years were going to be fun, and in case you looking at Sakoin and Acker, and you're saying, I'm going to be transformed into a child of the universe? I think not. Let's have a look at some of this. Pluto in Aquarius last time. There's a distinct theme to this. 429 to 403 BC, the Peloponnesian War, which is between Athens and Sparta, end of Athens, and the end of Athenian high era. So therefore, all the lovely plays and literature and philosophy and the people who built the Parthenon and all of that, the great flowering of Greek culture, stops right there in 403 BC, and Athens is never great again. 184 to 159, when there was also a Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, is the end of Macedonian power, and that stops Greece being a power again and enables Rome to step forward. 60 to 85 AD, Nero and the Civil War and the Flavians, so Rome's empire in real trouble, and the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, leading to the diaspora, so therefore the Jewish kingdom and their history takes a big turn. 305 to 330, abdication of Diocletian, Constantine, a new emperor, who makes the empire Christian. And so the Roman Empire really starts becoming the prototype for the medieval world, rather than the Roman Empire, in a Julius Caesar and Augustus sort of sense. 550, dynasty changes in China and in Central America, collapse of the Gupta Empire in India, and the birth of Muhammad. So you've got a new world power emerging as others collapse. Then we have Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire and the start of the Vikings. 1041 to 63, the Great Schism, which draws a line down Europe between the Roman Church and the Greek and Russian Orthodox Church. The rise of the Seljuk Turks and the capture of Baghdad, which happens with relentless frequency all the way through history. 1286 to 1308 is bad for the Scots, and it's also bad for the Jews, who are expelled from England for the first time. England was the first country to expel the Jews from its borders. In China, you have dynasty change from the Song to the Yuan, and you have Kublai Khan, the first of the great Mongol emperors, and you have the end of the Templars. 1532 to 53, Church of England splits with Rome, Ottoman influence grows, and Baghdad gets captured again. And the Spanish and the Portuguese colonize the Americas, which is bad news for the indigenous peoples and their cultures. French and American revolutions we've already looked at. So, what are you 23 for 2044? It's time for another chapter of history, isn't it? I think I've made the point. As well as its declination, Pluto also has latitude. Latitude is how much a planet goes up and down from the ecliptic. The sun's latitude is always 0, of course. It never moves from the ecliptic. The planets don't move much, 2 or 3 degrees. Mercury zips up and down a bit, 6 degrees. But Pluto, because of the eccentricity of its orbit, goes well up into the teens. Look, here you can see there's 20, 19, 18. See where we're getting? That is high. So I'm thinking that this is how Pluto comes out of the ground, and he shows himself and takes Persephone, and then he goes down again, and then he comes up, and then he goes down again. Thing is, what is revealed as he crosses the ecliptic, and what do we lose as he takes it down again, never to be recovered? I'm just saying that. Same again. I'll let you read that. We've only just lost it, whatever it was. November 2018, something has been stolen from us. It will hide itself and return to the underworld until about 2175. So not going to get it back. Maximum northern latitude will always come when Pluto's in Libra. Maximum southern latitude will always be when it's in Aries. What is Pluto actually going to do while it's in Aquarius? Well, it's going to be there for 20 years. And during that time, it will interact with other planets, big ones, for 6 cycles, making 16 aspect sets and 48 events. The 1891 Pluto-Neptune cycle will run through its second set of sextiles over the next 6 years or so, 2026 to 2032. 13 of them in total, as they make and break sextile in the first half of Aquarius. The 1965 Uranus-Pluto cycle that gave us the modern world, or the modern society that we still live in, will reach its opening trine. And Pluto will be in the early part of Aquarius, and that will happen 5 times. The 1999 Chiron-Pluto cycle. Oh yes, it's further out than, it's an outer planet. It's quick though. It will reach its squares in these years, its trines in these years, and then its opposition when Pluto is right at the end of Aquarius, and they'll just do it once before Pluto slips into Pisces. But if you think about what Chiron means to you, and I have to say I'm not much of a Chiron astrologer, I'm sure you will have ideas for both Chiron and Pluto. If you are sensitive to these 2 planets, you really need to note their cycle, which is working its way through. And it's a long cycle. It takes about 90 years to complete. The Saturn-Pluto cycle of 2020, we all know that's what brought us COVID and all the rest of it. The previous one was in 1982, which brought us AIDS, actually. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. Opening squares, opening trine, load of oppositions, closing trine. Where it's heading for is the next conjunction, which will be in 2053. But there's a lot of this. 3 of those, 1 of those, 3 of those, 1 of those. Whoops. The Jupiter-Pluto cycle reaches its square, its opposition, and its closing square. And in 2033, it starts a new one, which is not surprising because this is the shortest of all the cycles of the outer planets. The Jupiter-Pluto cycle only runs for about 12 or 13 years. It nearly completes itself while Pluto is actually in Aquarius. But wow, 48 different major planet aspects in 20 years. There's a lot going on. There is plenty of time for Pluto to leave you in no doubt as to what it is doing while it's in Aquarius. Let me just read great cycles, which I pay a great deal of attention to. The 1891 conjunction is here at 8 degrees of Gemini, and I always take this as the signature of the modern world. The world that we have now, where we have roads and hospitals and electric light and buses and that kind of thing. This is what came into being, more or less, modern city life, if you like, and the things that we take for granted: schools, hospitals, lights that come on. 1891. What you need to remember about this is 8 degrees of Gemini, because that now becomes a hot degree, and anything that passes it, any outer planet, Saturn, Uranus, or indeed Neptune, will reactivate this chart. It will be an epicycle of this chart. And so you'll see the story that this tells picked up again. And particularly this thing, the 82-year sextile. What happens is that after they were together in Gemini, by 1950, Pluto had moved forward into Leo and Neptune had moved forward into Libra. And so they were at sextile, all well and good. But as they move backwards and forwards a bit each year, what happens is that they keep making and breaking sextile. And then what happens is that Neptune outpaces Pluto for a bit, but then Pluto gets faster by moving inside Neptune's orbit while it is in Scorpio, and it catches Neptune up again. And so the sextiles can occur again. And then what happens finally is that Neptune will break away. And it actually takes them 82 years to finish doing all their sextiles. There has been quite a bit of stuff in the astrological chatter rooms about how the coming sextiles of Neptune and Pluto, because they're about to recur again. The ones from 1950 ran on until 1986. And the ones that are starting again will start again in about 2026, and then they'll they'll run on till 2032, as you can see, how it could be another great era for astrology, how it could be fantastic stuff for us all who all loved this original sextile, because we learnt our astrology from it, and the astrology books of the time said it gave us ESP and an understanding of the psychic realities of the world and all of this. So you say, oh, great, this is the way astrology thinks. This will be doing it again. May I just point out that this at the time was in Libra. Neptune in Libra is indeed very peace, man. Neptune in Aries, exactly opposite it, is anything but. Therefore, the prevailing mood of the era will be much more dogmatic, much more warlike, much more nationalistic than the peace-loving Libra of 1950. This is really something we should be worried about, Neptune in Aries. And that Pluto, which was in Leo, baby boomer place, will then be in middle of Aquarius, which is what we're looking forward to. So in fact, they are almost 17 there, 14 there, 17 there, 14 there. What they've done is they've managed to oppose their original places, thereby reversing whatever energies they have and whatever way they're going to play it out, whilst remaining in sextile. This is a remarkable stunt. It's almost like they've been in handcuffs. But the last one is in 2032, and then Pluto is free to do what he wants without Neptune softening him in any way. Worth bearing in mind. This is 1965. This is the great Pluto with Uranus in Virgo, which to many people, it's the start of the generation of love and so on and so forth. But one of the things I think it does, which people don't always think about, is that it breaks down Virgoan things. And amongst the original ideas that went with Virgo and the sixth sign and the sixth house was the idea of your servants. Domestic servants were common right up to the middle of the 20th century. After the 1960s, almost nobody, even if they could afford them, had domestic servants, because domestic servants simply didn't believe that they were in any way inferior to the people they were serving. It's like that bubble burst, that you have to have a belief that you have superior and inferior people. And if you destroy that belief, then you can't have servants, can you? So I think there was something of that going on there. Now, I want you to be aware of this one, and this is quite special. It doesn't appear to involve Pluto, apart from the fact that the sun is conjoined to it, but actually it does, because this is clearly a Uranian thing. It was done using uranium, and so Uranus is right up at the top, exactly on the midheaven. But I wanted you to note how Mars was sextile to Pluto. So this is very powerful war thing, but that it's on that Pluto-Neptune degree of 9 degrees of Gemini. And throughout the 20th century, when anything touches 9 degrees of Gemini, you find that it becomes Plutonic. It becomes irreversible. Whatever happens is something that affects a large number of people. Something is taken from us, and so on and so forth. This particular map repays endless research, and it has had it in the past, but it's this resonant degree, and it just shows how Pluto's largest cycle for all of our lifetimes is just waiting to be activated at 9 degrees of Gemini. So you need to be aware of that as things come to it. Saturn will come to 9 degrees of Gemini in 8 years from now? Jupiter, year after next. It's worth looking at. Here are all the big Pluto things. There's Pluto, Uranus. Here are your Saturn, Plutos. So we're expecting Pluto to show itself. Now, as a giver of wealth, we did say that Pluto is to do with wealth. And I've shown this many times to many people. It comes from the AA's wonderful magazine Correlation, wonderful journal, by a chap called Rudy Bez. in 2002. And what he did is, this is Pluto, by the way, and there it is coming down, and it's about there now. There it is in Capricorn, coming into Aquarius, then through Pisces. This is the entire 21st century, and then into Aries, and so on and so forth. So this is longitude rendered as a graph, rendered as a sine wave. Here is Neptune, here is Uranus, and of these quick ones that look like dotty string, the one with more dots on is Saturn, and the fastest moving one is Jupiter. And he gave these values and then added all the values up, and you get that, and then you add all of them up and you get this. And this has proven to be the most extraordinarily reliable indicator of the world's financial status. And right now we are here experiencing the greatest slide of the century. What's more, it won't be matched until the second half of the 2050s, and again in the early 2080s. I don't think there'll be many of us left to see that one. But we were doing absolutely fine up until 2019, and then COVID hit, and we bounced back, and now we're just sliding. Okay? And he also says, the way that he's done this is that when things are up here, you get national disturbances and wars. When things are in the middle band, it's international disturbances and wars. When they're in the bottom band, they are global disturbances and wars. So the 2030s doesn't look too good. The 2060 looks like a low point, and so on. But this has always been so. If you look at the previous century, this is the 1418 war, and this is the Second World War. But what we have been doing is we have been climbing, more or less, ever since then, into a period of enormous prosperity and consumer spending, if you like. And most of the developed world had a really good time in the 80s and 90s. And even after a bit of a dip, that's the dot-com bust, it lurched down a bit, we managed to kind of fight our way back. But now we really do have to recalibrate things. And how much of this actually is to do with the positioning of Pluto? If we took the Pluto curve, out of it, would it shift the values? And the answer is yes. It would make the values, the high values, lower. It would make the low values higher, and it would start to even it out a bit. And so you need to be careful what it is that you are taking as your parameters. But here, when Pluto seems to be at the top of its curve, seems to be when things are at their best. So in other words, it's when things are in Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, that they are, in a way, contributing most to a material society. And the rest of the time, they're not. So it's very, very interesting how Pluto gives us wealth and takes it away. What is going to be the wealth generator of years to come? Well, clearly the internet is something. Looking at this, and Pluto here is being helpful, amazingly, to the Venus. Does this mean that the internet is going to be full of Venusian things, pictures of kittens and cheap pornography? It's possible. The sun seems to be pulling away from the trine. But you have to admit that the internet is really to do with this. This is the dissemination of the technology. So it's really to do with that 1993 Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which is a different cycle. It's not really Plutonic. Let's look elsewhere. The iPhone, okay, actually has a date of birth. And it was in the early evening. And I've set it for 7 o'clock in the evening when Steve Jobs announced to the faithful that the iPhone was going to happen. And I love the way that This is going to transform the way we view things, the way we look at ourselves, and also it's going to transform what we look at. Maybe our view of the world is going to be taken away from us, and our view of the world will be what we can see on an iPhone screen. Certainly, this is a very powerful horoscope. And again, there are strong oppositions in it. But I don't mind about iPhones too much. What I mind about is the big data. Where I think that Pluto in Aquarius is really going is the idea of that leveling of Aquarius, where everything is equal, everybody is made the same. And if everybody has all of their data made available to the big data collectors, to people like Facebook, to people like Amazon, and so on and so forth, then they will know everything about you and can predict things, not because you are an individual, but because you belong to a mass of people who all behave in a similar way. And will the machines, will Pluto, which has taken from us our individuality, our birth data, our purchasing data, our internet search data, our bank details, our health data, will it then start to make its own decisions? This is what everybody fears. It will do so in a way which is strictly according to the best principles of logic, fairness, even-handedness, and even well-meant kindliness. This is artificial intelligence. This is AI. Does AI have a birth chart? It does. In 1956, there is a thing called the logic theory machine. Two early computer mathematicians, Newell and Simons, working at Rand Computers in Santa Monica, created what they called the logic theory machine, which was a computer program that enabled the computer to solve complex mathematical problems. In some cases, it provided better mathematical proofs of certain theorems than famous mathematicians of the past had managed. Yes, it was all to do with working through all the possibilities and evaluating them to see which one was best, but it was a very big step, and it is generally considered to be the start of what is now called artificial intelligence. Their paper on the subject and how it works is available on the net to read in facsimile, because they submitted it to their bosses, having written it up and typed it up as a thick typescript, and that as a sequence of PDFs is available. And there on the front is the date, 15th of June 1956. So let's set the chart for noon and see what we've got. Don't pay too much attention to the houses, but what a thick web of planetary interference we have here. And Jupiter conjunct Pluto, this is Pluto made even bigger. I mean, it's almost as if Pluto rules the underground, as we know, and Jupiter rules the sky, as we know, and this is everything, absolutely everything. As the movie says, everything, everywhere, all at once. And they are squared by Saturn. Perhaps Saturn is hoping to hold them back, or maybe Saturn is saying, do it logically. Because Pluto is just wanting to take things to itself. Hades is greedy when he takes Persephone, and Jupiter just wants to make things bigger. And Saturn says, steady on, there's real power here, there's real control to be had. That's Saturn in Scorpio, and it's going backwards. So it's tightening that square to the pair of them. I think this is a very interesting horoscope to look at. I also like the T-square between the node. I haven't marked the south node on, but you can see where it's going to be. And Mercury and Mars. What an incisive, how can I put it, cutting sort of intelligence this Mercury-Mars square produces. And yet there is a kind of strange allure to it as well, because Venus and Mars are in trine. But Mars in Pisces is weird stuff. Absolutely weird stuff. It's not happy there. It's a knife in the water, isn't it? It sinks. It's not good. Uranus is happy being close to Saturn, showing that this is a piece of tech. and also to the North Node. Is this the way that we were somehow destined to go? I don't know. But what I do know is that as we start moving Pluto round through Aquarius in the 5th house of this chart, by the beginning of the 2040s, we will see Pluto there opposing its original start date, and then you will see some genuine artificial intelligence. Not sure whether all of us will still be there or would want to be there, but this is something to look at. Let's have a look at something else which is very Plutonic. China. Lots of birth charts for China, but this is the one we're going to do. What I want you to note is how warlike it is with Mars and Pluto together in the 8th, and how the moon, the people of China, are at that very vulnerable place. Vulnerable because that's where, you know, I've lost the arrow, there it is. Because Pluto is going to be crossing that moon very soon indeed. It'll be doing it in 2024. So we will see something from the people of China. Not sure what, but it will be something. Taiwan is in trouble. We know that. They're in a lot of pressure from their largest neighbour. This may not be the right chart for Taiwan. There's a lot of discussion of it in Nick Campion's book on world horoscopes, but we'll take this one. And it's going to be getting quite scary soon because Pluto is going to be on the Venus within weeks, and then it will go back to it later in the year and then come back over it. So in 2023 to 24, yes, as I put there, March 2023 to November 2024, it will have Pluto over the Venus. So what? So Venus rules the ascendant. This is a Venusian chart, so to speak. It's the chart ruler, and the land of Taiwan, the homeland of it, is going to be the 4th house. So the chart ruler in the 4th is going to be Plutonized. Is it going to be stolen back? Will China erupt out of nowhere and take it back? I don't know. Uranus exactly on the moon. We shouldn't really be looking at Uranus. We're looking at Pluto. But again, that's not good for their people. Saturn opposite their Mars. I think they'd better get their armed forces together. But Pluto on the Venus is going to transform Taiwan. Last year, please note, Pluto, all the problems that there were in Sri Lanka in 2022, Pluto crossing the natal node and trining its own position, activating the trine, which has the sun, the essence of the nation. And they were having a Chiron return at the same time, where people were suffering great shortages of food and fuel. But what I'm showing you from these charts is how Pluto does have the power to move whole nations. It seems to like it best when it can move everybody at once, because after all, in the myth, Hades has all of us under his sway, because we're all going to go to the underworld eventually. And nearly finally, and we're just coming up to the 1 hour, the Pluto return of the United States. What does it do? Well, it opposes the Mercury for a start, and we could debate this chart endlessly, and people have. But a Pluto return must surely be at a time when things which perhaps were underground at the time of the original are brought to the surface, and things which were in plain sight until now are taken down below. The things which are coming up are the fact that America was founded as a confederation of slave-owning nations, and that problem has still not been resolved. Black Lives Matter. And there were also a pioneer society, which meant that most people were armed, and they have not resolved that issue. And also in a pioneer society, the men make the decisions and the women make the sandwiches. And that issue has not been resolved either. And all three of these came up most noticeably last summer, and will, I think, continue over the next few years, because they've been reactivated by that Pluto return. But it's okay, because Americans do pay attention to this, because here in New York, and I'm very grateful for this snapshot, which was forwarded to me by Melanie Reinhart, lovely lady. The United States' first ever Pluto return, life, death and rebirth. Which side of history will you stand on? I mean, apart from the fact that you say only in America, surely, it also assumes that the viewer understands enough astrology. And that shows you that perhaps what we've been doing with our astrology since its great resurgence in the 1950s and 60s has actually had some effect. This is not so much an advertisement as almost an astrological political statement. I don't know who paid for it to be put up in the little advertising frame there, but what percentage of people would actually understand it? Very interesting idea, this one. And as you might say, only in America.
Yeah, okay, Ben. Well, thanks very much for that very wide-ranging approach